So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a really, really bad 2014 season. They were close in a lot of games, but they had a few other games that got steamrolled. Finished 2-14, but at least they did it right. If you're going to suck, you go all the way, and you get the #1 overall pick when you have two potential franchise quarterbacks on the board there for the taking. That's what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did in 2014. That's the greatness of that 2014 season, as bad as it may have been from the outside looking in, is that long term, it was the best thing that could have happened to the organization. They got their #1 overall pick, and they got the best guy for them in Jameis Winston. And now in 2015, you mark the beginning of the Jameis Winston era. And, for a team that went 2-14 in 2014, as I had referenced in the season preview, things didn't quite look as bad as they maybe seemed or maybe as the record would indicate. And I would have expected some type of improvement, some type of growth from this team in 2015. And ultimately, we did see that. Yeah, I thought this team could maybe finish around 500, and at one point in time, they were 500 at 6-6 before losing their last 4 games. But a 6-10 season where you kept your young franchise quarterback healthy all year, and there was some definite legitimate growth and development throughout the course of the year, to me, that's a good season. And to me, that bodes well for the future. And maybe to a certain degree, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization agrees, but maybe they did it. And maybe that's why they decided to fire Lovie Smith, or there are other stupid-ass reasons that I'll touch on here in a moment or two. But a 6-10 record, and a year after getting the #1 overall pick, now you've got another top 10 pick, this time the 9th overall pick, so you have a chance to get another impact player. And things, I think, are looking up for the Buccaneers organization and their trajectory. Their needle is definitely pointing upward. In terms of what went well this past 2015 season, I think you got to start with Jameis Winston, the #1 overall pick. Yeah, he had that nightmare start to the season in week 1 against Marcus Mariota and the Tennessee Titans. But once you got past that, and you got past those occasional moments, especially early on in the year, where Jameis wasn't very good, and Jameis had those games where he turned the ball over way too much, he calmed down. He settled down. He settled in. And he ended up throwing for over 4,000 passing yards, and to me gave no indication at all that he won't end up developing into a franchise quarterback, similar to Marcus Mariota. And even though I preferred Marcus Mariota by just a little bit ahead of that 2015 NFL draft, if you remember, I did say that I didn't think the gap was that great. I didn't. I just preferred Mariota a little bit more, but I thought Jameis Winston would also be a long-term NFL franchise quarterback, and I think he's going to. And for so many years, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have lacked that. I mean, you go back and look at the history books for this organization, Vinny Testaverde is still the career leader in passing yards, for Christ's sakes. So Jameis Winston has a chance very quickly in his career to go down as the best Buccaneers quarterback in franchise history. Not that that's saying a whole lot, but again, the point being is that it's moving the needle and it's changing the trajectory and the aura of the organization. But there was more than just Jameis Winston and his development throughout the course of the year that I think gives you some reason for optimism about what happened in 2015 and going forward. You look at Doug Martin. The team made a decision before the year began to not pick up Doug Martin's 5th-year option, therefore making this a contract year, and Doug Martin responded in a big way. He played like the muscle hamster you remember seeing back in 2012. He finished 2nd in the league in the rushing yards behind Adrian Peterson. He was just a really, really good running back this year. A lot of big-time explosive plays. If I'm not mistaken, he had the most runs of 20-plus yards this season. So he was a big play guy. He ran hard. He ran angry. He ran with a purpose. And now he's put the organization in a situation where they got to figure out what they're going to do, whether or not they're going to plug big money into Doug Martin going forward. Again, I look at this team, and with Jameis Winston, especially some of the earlier season struggles and some of the bad games he had mixed in early, they found a way at one point in time to get it to 6-6. I mean, that was a really good stretch of games that were playing there in the middle portion of the season. 6-6. Maybe not quite good enough in the NFC to get to the playoffs, but you were thinking maybe this would be a team that could at least get to 8-8, maybe finish with a winning season at 9-7, and maybe that's what it would have taken to save Lovie Smith's job, and maybe there was nothing that could have saved it. I don't know. But you look at the defense, they finished top 10 in the league in rushing yards allowed per game. So there was a little bit of growth there, a little bit of progression there. If you can run the ball and you can stop the run, that's a good formula for success in the NFL. It always has been, and it always will be. So there's some really positive things. Now, there were some things that didn't go well. I look at the defense and I look at the overall lack of defensive progression. It was a lot of stagnation from 2014 to 2015. They were good against the run, but they were still somewhat vulnerable against the pass. They were adequate rushing the passer, but they weren't great. Just not enough. Just not enough on defense, not enough talent there, and not enough improvement in progression. And I think that in some ways helped contribute to another thing that went poorly for this team was their 0-4 finish to the season. You know, this is something where 2015 was going to be whatever 2015 was. And don't make a mistake about it. At the end of the day, it was only about one thing, and that was Jameis Winston and his growth and development as an NFL starting quarterback as a rookie. That's what it was all about. If you go 0-16, but Jameis Winston plays great, then you feel terrific still about your future. I don't care what anybody says. But if you go 8-8 and Winston looks like crap, then what are you really as an organization? You know, but at the end of the day, an 0-4 finish, not a good way to build some momentum heading into the offseason where you may be pointing to 2016 to do some better things. And that's what it is. But now we get to the decision that was stunning. And every year, I guess you'll get one of these surprising fires that kind of comes out of nowhere. Maybe last year, it was John Fox being fired by the Denver Broncos after they lost again in the divisional round of the playoffs. But this year, to me, the surprise firing has to be Lovie Smith. And, you know, I just don't get it. And I'll get on my soapbox here for just a minute. Now, for some of these Buccaneer fans that might come in the comment section and try to pretend like I don't understand Lovie Smith or I don't know Lovie Smith, I'm going to put it this way. You see this shirt? I had to experience 9 years of Lovie Smith, the good and the bad. I will take my 9 years of intimate understanding of the Lovie Smith experience over year 2. I assure you of that. I assure you of that. I can tell you all about Lovie's greatness in certain areas and his serious weaknesses and shortcomings in other areas. Don't ever get that mistaken. Similar to the Bears for many years. He would sit there and you'd have those games where they won that they shouldn't have won. Then they'll have those other games that they stay really competitive. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. And then they'll have a couple of games every year they just get boat raced. You're not going to tell me anything I don't know about Lovie Smith is my fucking point. So speaking for somebody who dealt with Lovie Smith as the Bears head coach for 9 seasons, it is absolutely astoundingly, ridiculously fucking stupid that they fired him after 2 seasons when they had just won 4 more games than they did the year before with a rookie quarterback. Here's what's partly ridiculous about this decision, in my opinion. Maybe this organization was looking at it and thinking that Lovie Smith should have done better on the defensive side of the ball. That sounds great in theory, and Lovie's got the X's and O's for that cover too. For that organization. That organization won a Super Bowl running that same damn defense, mind you, back in 2002. But if you don't give him the Jimmies and Joes that fit into his defensive system, you're facing an uphill battle. When Lovie Smith was hired to be the Chicago Bears head coach before the 2004 season, Jerry Angelo and Lovie Smith went into that first draft, and in the first 2 rounds, they picked 2. Tommy Harris, Tank Johnson. 2 interior penetrators, 2 guys to play in the middle of that cover 2 defense. Then later on in the 4th round, they picked a guy that was a really good fit as a cover 2 corner, Nathan Vasher, so on and so forth. My point being is they gave Lovie Smith personnel to work with. It helped, yes, that he already had some of the infrastructure, Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs and Peanut Tillman and Mike Brown in place. But Lance Briggs benefited tremendously from what Lovie Smith allowed him to do. Mike Brown benefited tremendously from what Lovie Smith's system allowed him to do. Urlacher was a stud regardless of the fact. But the Bears went out and tried to get him some personnel to run that system. They traded for Adewale Ogunleye. You know, you got to remember all of this. So in the 2 years that Lovie Smith was in charge of this team, they devoted exactly 1 pick to the defensive side of the ball. And that's just ludicrous. You're asking a guy to go in a situation and be successful as he possibly can be without giving him the tools and the resources to be as successful as he possibly can be. They devoted their entire draft in 2014 to the offensive side of the ball and then turned around in 2015 and devoted every pick but one, their 4th rounder that they spent on Quan Alexander, on the offensive side of the ball. In 2 years, Lovie Smith got 1 draft pick to work with on the defensive side of the ball. And wouldn't you know, like I said after the 2015 draft, Quan Alexander was a solid pick for this team. He was going to fit very well in the middle of that Tampa 2 defense. So what do you fucking know? This guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to Lovie Smith and his goddamn system. So then they sit there, don't give them that. But imagine the 2014 draft. If any of you remember, I was screaming from the rooftops and talked about it repeatedly, How much Lovey Smith would have a hard-on for Aaron Donald. How great of a fit Aaron Donald would be next to Gerald McCoy. Aaron McDonald would be better than Gerald McCoy. And that if Lovey wanted anybody out of that entire draft class, he would want Aaron Donald. And the Buccaneers are sitting there in the position at the 7th overall pick to pull the trigger on the guy that could have taken that Buccaneers defense to a whole different level, brother. And instead they took Mike Evans. Mike Evans, solid player. A really, really nice prospect coming out of that draft class. I don't dispute that. It was a solid pick, but it wasn't the best pick for the Buccaneers. It just wasn't. Then in the second round, they spend a pick on a tight end, and then they spend multiple other picks, all on the offensive side of the ball. You turn around in 2015, you're in the position to take Jameis Winston. You got to take him. I don't dispute that whatsoever. But after that, Donovan Smith, Ali Marpet, and all these other players on the offensive side of the ball, at some point in time, what the hell is Lovie Smith supposed to do? If you don't give him the young pieces in place to be able to, plug them in and run that cover 2 system and learn that cover 2 system and grow that cover 2 system, then what do you expect the results to be? Yes, you can point to some of the bust kind of free agent signings of Michael Johnson and Alteron Verner, but there were other people involved in that, and all the while, Lovie Smith didn't get the type of guys out of the draft that he should have gotten that would have helped him. Even when you look at 2015, they took the one offensive lineman, I think it was Kadeem Edwards. One pick before Talvin Smith went to the Jacksonville Jaguars. My Christ. Could you imagine a linebacking core that featured Levante David and Talvin Smith running that cover 2 system? It would be crazy. If you don't give them the personnel to run the defense, then why the fuck did you bring them in to begin with? And even more astounding to me is the fact that a lot of the buzz is about, at least as of this recording, that the Buccaneers want to promote Dirk Cutter and they want to make him the head coach. Well, ding dong, dumb dicks. The same time you hired Lovie Smith as head coach, you hired Dirk Cutter to be your offensive coordinator. If you love Cutter so much then why the fuck didn't you just hire him to be your head coach? This is stupid and this is ridiculous. What the fuck has Dirk Cutter done to indicate that he will be a whole lot better as a head coach than Lovie Smith? One of the most important things you can do for a young franchise quarterback is give him stability and continuity, especially in the leadership at the top and the system that he's in. Now, you're keeping him in the same offensive system, yes, especially if you promote Dirk Cutter to be your head coach. But that stability at the top in terms of the leadership is not there. And I don't give a fuck what anybody says. One of the things that I will always praise Lovie Smith for is how he conducted himself as a man and as a professional. And you don't think in some way, shape, or form that Jameis Winston didn't buy into Lovie Smith and the way he conducted and carried himself as a man, as a human being, as a professional? You don't think Lovie Smith had any impact over that whatsoever? You're fucking insane. And the Buccaneers organization, after 2 years, are fucking insane. They've actually had, I believe, more head coaches in the past decade than the Cleveland Browns have. And just as you're starting to build something, 6-10 speaks to all you want to say. Yeah, there's a thing like, you dumbass, of growth, development. It takes time. The roster wasn't good. The organization wasn't good. And 2 years later, it's a whole hell of a lot better than it was. There's still room to go, yes. But maybe you shouldn't have devoted 2 entire drafts to the offensive side of the ball, and maybe you would have gotten more defensive progression. Imagine Aaron Donald playing next to Gerald McCoy in the middle of your goddamn defense. Ridiculous. So now you talk about offseason priorities. Obviously, they got to figure out what they're going to do at head coach. It seems like Dirk Cutter, their offensive coordinator, is going to be the guy, and you can kind of tell how I feel like that. If you loved him so bad 2 years ago, then you should have just fucking hired him to be the head coach to begin with. This team needs to make a decision on Doug Martin. In my opinion, in this point, they need to just go ahead and re-sign Doug Martin. Don't get cute. Don't get carried away. One of the best things you can have for a young quarterback is a well-established running game. That safety valve in the backfield. Well, you have that safety valve in the backfield in Doug Martin. And it's not time to go shaking it up now. You took a risk, and you lost the risk because Doug Martin had a really, really good 2015 season. And now they've got to go into this offseason. They've got to build up that defense. They've got to do it a little bit maybe in free agency, but mostly through the draft. And that's where most of their needs are. They've got to get, number one, some type of edge rusher. They lack an edge rusher so very, very bad. And with their 9th overall pick, that's one area I would strongly consider that they would be looking at addressing. Whether that be DeForest Buckner, who I'm not sure will be there, or guys like Emmanuel Ogbah or Shaq Lawson from Clemson. One or both of them could be there. Those guys could all be impact potential edge rushers for this 4-3 Tampa Bay defense, and impact edge rushers to help take some of the pressure off of Gerald McCoy in the middle of that defense. To me, that's the number one priority. It's the one thing they were missing under Lovie Smith's defense as much as anything else, any other shortcomings they had, and that's the thing that's got to be addressed now. They got to find that guy. Even if he ended up being just a situational pass rusher like Simeon Rice largely used to be. You won a Super Bowl with Simeon Rice putting up 14, 15 sacks as a situational pass rusher. I'm just saying. He took some pressure off of Warren Sapp in the middle of that defense. They need some help in that defensive secondary, though. You can point to corner, and that's certainly a need, and maybe guys like Vernon Hargraves could be in play at number 9 overall. Maybe Jalen Ramsey's in play at number 9 overall, although he might be even in more play for them at the safety position at number 9 overall later on in the draft. A lot's going to depend on what type of defensive system they run going forward. I assume they would stick in the 4-3 because ultimately you've got to go with what the strengths are of Gerald McCoy and Levante David, and those are 4-3 defenders. You need to keep them in the 4-3, but what type of 4-3 you run is yet to be determined. So in terms of with their needs at defensive end, free safety, corner, a lot of that is yet to be determined because you have to figure out what type of system they're going to run and what type of players will fit into that system. And that's going to be important. But offensively, they still need help on the offensive line, especially right tackle to me is a huge need area. And then you look at wide receiver, Vincent Jackson battled some injuries this year. At some point in time, you're going to wonder how much longer they're going to keep him around. You've got Mike Evans there, but you need more. They could definitely use some type of weapon out of the slot, which is kind of crazy because they devoted 2 drafts primarily to the offensive side of the ball, and they still have some major important needs on that side of the ball. I'm just saying. So, to me, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a frustrating organization to me right now in this sense, is that they were making progression. They were making growth. And in my opinion, they had the right man for the job. And their needle was pointing upward. Why are you going to unnecessarily rock the boat when you have no guarantee? It's one thing if you fired Lovey Smith because you said, we want to bring in Tony Dungy. Dungy's done more in his coaching career. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Lovie Smith will not be. It'd be different if you said, Bill Cowher wants to come in and coach. Again, Bill Cowher is going to be a Hall of Famer. Lovie Smith is not. Lovie Smith, though, has pedigree. He has background. He has some, at least, proven success at the NFL level as a head coach. Dirk Cutter does not. You don't make lateral or, in this case, potentially downward moves at the head coaching position at such an important time in your young quarterback's career. That's just crazy and asking for trouble, in my opinion.